the job of government to both implement the agenda it took to the people at the last election and to anticipate problems, to respond to events, if you like. There's not much point a Prime Minister exclaiming, "What a surprise," when something terrible happens. If he was looking ahead, he would see that this calamity has been coming down the pipeline for some time. Here's an example. Right now in New South Wales, there's a massive baseload power problem looming when the Liddell generator closes in a couple of years' time. When it goes, so too will a significant component of New South Wales' power supply, meaning blackouts, price rises and industry going offshore. The same thing's on the cards as gas supply becomes fraught because of bans on exploration that again will mean blackouts, price rises and industry going offshore. Now, these are just two of the big examples coming down the track at us that government generally hopes will just go away, or that someone else will have to deal with it when the rubber really hits the road. Today we learnt about another, and that's the imminent release of Australian jihadi terrorists from jail and their threatening presence on our streets if nothing is done now to provide a safer option. Ellen Winnett in the Daily Telegraph today reports that 10 of 54 convicted terrorists, the worst of the worst, currently behind bars here in Australia, are due for release before the end of next year. In this country, at least, unlike Britain, the default position, at least for the time being, has been not to grant bail or parole for terror offences. Still, even stiff sentences are eventually served, meaning that terrorists will eventually be released, despite the increasing evidence that few really repent of their crimes or drop the evil ideology behind them. Obviously, the latest London Bridge terrorist out on parole, despite being described as a continuing threat to safety when first sentenced, exemplifies a problem that I discussed here last week with the so-called de-radicalisation programs that are found to be flawed. As Lowy Institute research showed, less than 10% of convicted terrorists show any remorse for their crimes, which means that 90% plus show no remorse. And Lowy research also found that less than 30% of these convicted terrorists are said at sentencing to have any prospects at all of successful rehabilitation. And that's understandable, because these are crimes of premeditated conviction, not passion. Then there's the fact that more than half of those Australians who went to Afghanistan to fight for the Taliban were subsequently involved in terror plots here when they eventually returned home to Australia. In government and here on this program, I've been highly critical of the so-called de-radicalisation programs, which often waste millions, putting would-be terrorists into contact with imams scarcely less radical than they are, people who actually make excuses for terrorism, even if they're careful not to quite justify it, and that's the imams. Well, today in the Australian newspaper, the Dean of Law at Swinburne University has said, and I quote, "There's not a single program that has been proven to be effective at positively changing the attitudinal mindset of terrorists." Now, let's not forget he's an academic. He says not a single program, not one. The London Bridge terrorist told authorities he had reformed, that he wanted to be a normal member of British society. And naturally enough, people who want to believe the best of others, it took him at his word. And with that trust, he made a deliberate mockery of our willingness to forgive by killing in cold blood the organisers of a conference on criminal rehabilitation. Now, one suggestion is mandatory 30-year minimum sentences for convicted terrorists on the grounds that age is the one factor proven to reduce the likelihood of violent recidivism. But that makes sense, of course. But it won't work, though, for the terrorists who have already been sentenced, or for those deadly 10 Australia is soon to release. So what do we do about hardened terrorists who still believe in death to the infidel once their sentences are over, or for that matter, once they've returned to this country from their Islamic State killing fields overseas? One thing's for clear, they can't just be released back into the community, even with their ankle bracelets on, by telling us what we want to hear. They say we're reformed. As the London Bridge atrocity shows, that's not true. Don't, Australia, whatever you do, buy the furphy that outside of jail we can watch them in the community and keep people safe. Our security agencies simply do not have the manpower or the dollars to provide the rotating teams needed to provide 24/7 surveillance of known terrorists, if let free, in the community. And as London Bridge shows, ankle bracelets and monitoring is a joke. So far, the only thing we know that works is to keep them locked up. As happens in the United States, the real problem is what happens when sentences are up. And do we have the ticker to roll them over again and again if necessary to keep them locked up? I don't say that any of these are easy questions that a government has to find an answer to. But if the government isn't working on it and at least taking steps to minimise the danger, remember what I said about looking ahead? If it isn't, then the government simply isn't doing its job.